It was spring of 2019, and a friend of mine and myself had made a plan to go camping in the Adirondacks Mountains in upstate New York. We had planned the trip for about a month at this time. We gathered up all of our gear, got our maps together, and we figured we would go up there and stay the week. It was about 2 days before we were supposed to leave, and my friend had called and said that he had gotten sick. So I had to make a decision. Was I going to go up there to the Adirondacks Mountains by myself or cancel the trip? I felt like I couldn't really cancel the trip. I was super excited to go. Now, anybody that's been to the Adirondacks Mountains knows you got to worry about bears, and it's pretty rough terrain. So going alone was going to be dangerous, but I figured I was up for the adventure, and I couldn't see myself canceling a trip I'd been planning for the last month and a half. So I went ahead and I got my gear loaded up, and I started heading north up to the Adirondacks Mountains. I was pretty excited. I won't lie, I was a little bit nervous too. Been the first time I'd ever camped out like this by myself. We had a little spot we had been to before. It was way back in the woods, probably 2 or 3 miles off of any main road. We actually had to cross a pond in a little canoe, and the tent I had to set up was an old style teepee tent that it was going to be really tough for just me to set up alone. I managed to get the tent set up and a fire going, broke out a couple cans of soup, and went ahead and had dinner. It was starting to get pretty dark, and I was tired at this point in time, and I was ready to turn in. I figured in the morning I'd get up, do some target practice, and then probably head down to the lake to do some fishing. So I finished off my soup, I tucked myself in, and I went to bed. At some point in the night, I definitely woke up to something out there close to my campsite. But again, out here in the middle of nowhere, it could be just about anything. It didn't sound big enough to make me worried, so I went back to sleep. As the morning sunrise shone through my tent and woke me up, I was excited to get the day started. The first thing I was going to do was get the fire fired back up and get a little breakfast in me, set up a couple targets, get my fishing gear ready, and head into the wilderness. Other than the trail I came in on, which was really just a trail that we created a couple years back, there were a couple game trails that I could see leading out from the tent area. So I decided to follow one in the direction that we had been a couple years back. We found a good fishing spot not too awful far from the tent site. That day was the last day we were here, and towards the end of the day, as it was getting dark, we were walking back and noticed a trail that looked like it led up to a small cave. We decided not to check it out that day, but our plan this time was to definitely check it out. So I figured I'd go up there and at least take a couple pictures, send them over to Mike, and show him what he had been missing. I'd finally reached the edge of the lake where I decided to go ahead and do some fishing. I tossed my line in, set it up in the holder, decided to look around a little bit for maybe a stump I could sit on. I look across the lake, and it looked to me as if I could see some sort of a structure. It almost looked like possibly a lean-to. I definitely didn't remember seeing that the last time we were out here, but then again, it had been a couple years, and who knows, maybe somebody did set up camp out in this area at some point in time. It was also about this time that I had realized I had left my personal firearm back at the tent. I must have been in such a hurry that I forgot to pack it. So to be honest, I wasn't sure I wanted to push my luck and try to get closer and see what was going on. I just assumed maybe it had been left out here and I didn't have anything to worry. Worst case scenario, maybe it's a guy just like me out here camping and we end up becoming buddies. But if it happened to be something different, I wasn't ready to find out, at least not just on day 2 of my trip. So I fished a little bit more and decided I was going to go see if I could find that cave. I slowly started making my way up to where I thought that little trail was at that headed up towards that cave. It looked like there was, in fact, still a little game trail there, so I started following it up. I could see the cave off into the distance, or at least what we thought was a cave, and I moved in a little bit closer. At some point in time, I heard something break like a branch in the woods. It actually almost sounded like metal hitting metal. I froze up for just a second, listening to see if I'd hear it again. I didn't, so I kept on moving in a little bit closer to the cave. That's when I thought I saw what looked like somebody standing up on the hill just behind a tree, dressed up as best I could say like Daniel Boone. Almost at that exact moment, I heard a branch snap behind me. I turned around quickly to look. I didn't see anything, turned back around. The man that was standing in front of the cave was now gone. I thought maybe I was losing my mind. Surely this wasn't happening. I took off and started running towards the campsite, cautiously. I wasn't sure if there might be two of them out there. Whatever I heard behind me was really close. Then turning around, not seeing the guy at the cave, I don't really know what was going on. I just knew I had to get back to the campsite. From there, I'd decide if I was going to stick around for day 3. I made it back to the campsite, and at this point in time, I wasn't really sure if I was going to stick around or not. I started gathering up some of my gear and packing it away. It also seemed as if something or someone had been moving some of my items around. There were a few items I thought I had inside the tent that seemed to now be outside the tent. Then again, I left out in a hurry, so maybe I just forgot where it was at. I did know that I wanted to get my personal firearm, have it strapped on my hip just in case somebody came running up into my campsite. I went ahead and packed up most of my big items that I could get packed away just in case I had to get out of there in a hurry. Then I kind of took a few breaths, sat down for a second, just kind of listened to see if I could hear anything moving in closer to my camp. After sitting there for what seemed like an eternity, it started to get dark on me. I hadn't heard any kind of sounds other than the nature around me, so I decided maybe I was okay. I decided to go ahead and get out some food, cook me something to eat, and I was going to stay at least one more night. And then in the morning, I would decide if I was going to go home. After eating and stoking up the fire a little bit, I decided to go ahead and crawl into the tent and call it a night. It had definitely been an adventurous day, and I was wore down, hoping that nothing would come and bother me while I was sleeping. I felt like I had dozed off for a couple of hours. Then I kind of woke up to the sound of the fire, which sounded like it had blazed back up. My tent was lit up from the light. I thought I heard something out there shuffling around, even seeing a shadow on the tent. I decided to peek my head out. I was absolutely terrified to see a man sitting on a tree stump next to the fire. He looked like a large mountain man, very rugged, very burly. It scared me to death. Before I could say anything, he told me, "You got nothing to worry about, friend. My name's Eric, and we need to talk." I made my way out of the tent, still tired and a bit confused, and I sat down on a stump next to the big mountain man next to the fire. As I got sat down, Eric started to explain to me that there was a bear out in these woods that I definitely did not want to run across. I kind of looked at him confused. I kind of figured black bears wouldn't really bother me as long as I didn't mess with any of the mamas and their cubs. He told me that something had happened to this bear. He actually believed that possibly a hunter had taken out one of its cubs, and now it seeked revenge on all humans who ended up coming out there into that part of the Adirondacks Mountains. Eric then goes on to explain that a couple years back in 2017, him and his buddy had come out there to do some camping and some fishing. They were there a couple of days when they had split up, and one went to one side of the lake and Eric stayed on the other side. The next thing you knew, his buddy was getting attacked by this bear, and there was nothing that Eric could do about it except take off and run and not become another victim. By the time law enforcement and Parks and Recs got out there, his friend was nowhere to be found. So according to Eric, he was back. He was back to find his friend. It was also about this time that it dawned on me that Mike and I were also here back in 2017 and may have even actually heard this story and just chalked it up to people telling stories about the Adirondacks to make you scared and not go out there and camp. As Eric got up and started walking away back into the dark forest, he turned back and looked at me and said, "Stay away from that cave. I'm going to get that sumbitch tomorrow." It was still pretty much day 2 and day 3 because I didn't sleep a wink. And I was really happy when that sun started coming up that morning because I was ready to pack up and get my ass out of Dodge. I pretty much only gathered up my essential items, the things I knew I needed to have with me. I started heading back up the trail. I had about 2.5 miles to the gravel road, then probably another half mile to my vehicle in the parking lot. I just knew that I wasn't going anywhere near that cave. According to Eric, telling me to stay away from the cave made me think I had nothing to worry about heading back to my vehicle. However, it was still going to be a good hike, and I needed to get going immediately. I'm not going to lie. I made the one mistake you're not really supposed to make when you're in the woods and there might be predators around. As I got about a half a mile from the gravel road, I decided to start jogging a little bit. As my adrenaline got to kicking in, I started running and not really paying attention to what was going on around me. As I start coming around the corner almost at full speed, I noticed a big bear heading my way straight down the trail right at me. I stopped in my tracks, scared to death. The bear stood up on 2 legs, roaring and growling. The next thing I know, I see 2 arrows hit this huge bear right in the chest. Thump, thump. The next thing I know, the bear's back down on all fours, running to the right as quickly as possible. I turn around, look to see what just happened. Sure enough, there's Eric, standing there with his bow and arrow, grin on his face. "I told you I'd get that sumbitch. Now get out of the way. I gotta finish it." I didn't argue not one bit. I took off running, sprinting towards the vehicle, maybe the fastest I'd ever ran in my entire life. I got in the car as quickly as possible and I started heading on down the road. It took me a long time to unwrap the situation that took place up there in the Adirondack Mountains. All I really know for sure is that some mountain man, some stranger, saved my life that day. And I hope that he got his revenge on that bear that may have taken out his friend. All I know is this: it's going to be quite a while before I go back up to the Adirondack Mountains. Thanks for listening. Again, folks, I have no idea if these stories are true or not, but I definitely enjoy a good story. And if you're ever in the Adirondack Mountains, you better be careful of that bear that might still have 2 arrows in him. I appreciate y'all listening in. If you have a story you want to share, let me know. Until then, we'll see you on the other side of the rabbit hole.